this is just kind of my own thing, but like we owe so much to this man because he invented this idea that like being ethnocentric is bad. That was his idea in 1887, and no one credits him. So,
but then Chagnon's mentor disagreed with him on almost everything.
Yeah, because he was from a different school. He was from a Marxist school. And so you see, basically, like, another thing that made him unique is that the method he came up with went against the grain of every other like academic tradition, especially in the social sciences up until this point, because all writing or sociology about other people groups, it was done in this thing called an armchair fashion. If any of you took a psychology class, you would recognize this term. If you get, yeah, exactly. Do you watch that podcast?
I do not.
The Tertullians. Tertullians.
Like
Tertullians.
Freud?
Well, yeah, Freud. There's this idea of like armchair psychologists,
Sounds
Tertullians.
very Freudian.
but
Tertullian?
Tertullian.
if
You're
you
talking about the early church father? Tertullian?
No,
Yeah.
Tertullian. The practice of going in a group discussion, like in a living room,
Yeah,
originally in
I-
1800s, and discussing philosophical or
Yes.
social
Oh,
theories.
Tertullian. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
so
My
if,
hearing's not very good.
that's a good mental image to have. Another good one is an old European dude sitting in his armchair pontificating and making these dogmatic assertions about people or places never visited.
That's vulgar.
That sounds like Freud.
That's what it is, right? And they, before what he would propose and what he would do, anthropology or sociology was just gathering information and writings from military deployments and merchants and missionaries, rather than making first-hand contact with the people group and writing about it, right? And this actually determines a lot of things that we deal with today, right? Because these armchair anthropologists would create these wild theories based on accounts, and it would lead to so much bias against other people groups. And those biases, because people read at this time, or at least most people read at this time, way more than we do, they would get published, and it would kind of like baptize those biases into stereotypes which are still believed today. So if you look at a lot of late European like sociological research from the 1700s and 1800s, even if it wasn't called sociological research, that's where you get stereotypes about Asian people, Latino people, about Native American people, about different people in different places from Europe. This is where a lot of anti-Semitism kind of got made scientific, is in these armchair things. And Franz Boas was having none of it, and he said the way to understand cultures can only be done firsthand. You have to immerse yourself in it. And he even went on to write about you have to acknowledge your own biases, you have to acknowledge your own limitations, because he was a scientist. Anthropology is a science. It was debated in the 90s whether or not it was a science. Fucking won that debate. It is a science. And the true value of anthropology, the true value of ethnographic research is that it allows researchers and readers this close, intimate understanding of a culture while trying to remain as unbiased, or at least acknowledge your bias as much as possible, right? And I wanted to say that because, again, like, if you didn't take an intro to anthropology class, and if you didn't take a good intro to anthropology class, you would not know this. And if you don't know this story, then reading this book is going to make no sense to you. And that's the case with a lot of these things that I've read online. I actually thought the New York Times article did a great job of really capturing this idea. So if you guys read the article that Cara posted, then you would get that. This is one of my favorite ethnographies. It's called Affluence Without Abundance. It's about the disappearing world of the Bushmen. And it's a similar dynamic to what we actually have in modernity with the people group that we're studying today. So, next slide. Now that you understand anthropological research methods, you can understand our boys' research goals.
Well, that's a lot of money. So.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of theories that kind of govern analysis or what's actually being looked at and what the meaning is, and I won't belabor that. But ethnographic research involves embedding yourself into a culture to varying degrees and observing the culture or the people group by getting into that as much as possible. So, like, if I was going to analyze your family, I would do my best to probably try to get adopted and try to live with you.
For you.
We're boring though.
I would write about that, and I'd hopefully be nicer than this guy. But, you know, ethnographic research it's the kind of thing that can only be done firsthand, right? And it's all done through two things that Dr. Joe brought up, which is mostly through interviews and through what's called participant observation, where you are observing as a participant of that culture.
It's still qualitative research, though, right?
It is qualitative, but it can also be quantitative, which you saw.
Like that.
Yeah, which you saw with him, because there's
Yeah, he did both.
he's kind of doing both. It involves both, but it's mostly qualitative overall, right? And so if you Chagnon is you can read. He's actually from a school of anthropology called Sociobiology, which is kind of like a sub-theory of under the umbrella of evolutionary anthropology. And the idea of sociobiology is it's trying to understand humans and culture in light of evolutionary forces. And so, like, if you want to understand this and you understand Charles Darwin, we're talking about what drives culture, what makes people do, what makes value, what makes all these things in people's like lives is evolutionary forces. So what that means is the ability to reproduce and provide or make as many offspring as possible that will further your life. And this is a very popular idea like in the 50s, and that explains the reason why our boy Shaggy was like so laser beam focused on genealogies, because that would have been a way for him to do that. He said, he kind of thought to himself, if I can understand the genealogical story of these people, I can understand them as they understand themselves, because that was his framework meeting their reality. Right, and that's why he posits this thesis that he does in his book and in all of his writings, that Yanomami men who were more violent or fierce were able to be more evolutionarily successful, having more wives and therefore more offspring. And the reason why he comes to that is because of his framework, right? Because he was looking at it at a socio-biological level, right, to understand this people group. And that's why he's looking at genealogies and attempting to write an ethnography based on the literal story of these people's ethnographies here. So if we understand that, right, we kind of understand like why that made other anthropologists and anyone from FIU that I know in the anthropology department, that idea would piss everybody off, because that kind of like rubs up against what the other side of anthropology, this debate that was going on throughout all of the 1900s. And if you want evidence for this idea, the article that was shared in our group pointed to this reality. There was a Slate article that got written when he died that pointed this to reality. And Chagnon himself, in the edition of the book that some of you have, where it has the extra 2 chapters at the end.
6?
Yeah, 6, and the 6th edition, and it has 6 and 7 chapters. And in an interview in 2015 that I can send you a link to, pointed to this reality. The enduring controversy over this guy's work has been kind of like a microcosm of the conflict between this evolutionary thought, that it's Darwinian forces that push and drive culture, and sociocultural anthropology. And so he was obviously a biological anthropologist, and that rubbed up really negatively against sociocultural anthropologists, because these other anthropologists basically argue something entirely different, right? They say, like, the sociocultural people are like, it's not evolution, it's not the need to create offspring, it's human experience. And there's all sorts of different schools. There's it's human experience based on like environmental factors and material factors. Jared Diamond kind of falls into this, yes.
Why did it have to be one or the other? Why couldn't it have been both at play?
But what makes Jared Diamond's book so fire is that he actually kind of says it's both.
Yeah.
You want my honest opinion? We all know that human beings are imperfect. One of the most, if you ever talk to a kid, I love mommy, I hate daddy. At our most basic level, we tend to think in binaries. That's why there's only 2 parties in this country. There should be more, but that's why I think it would be one or the other. There was a third way that came in the 90s that we'll get to at the end.
Third way is always best.
Yes.
That's evolution.
Yeah. So when he came out and he said this, and he made this book that just exploded, like everyone started picking this thing up. It really pissed off all these sociocultural people, because if you say Yanomami are successful reproductively because of violence, or Yanomami are violent to be successfully evolutionary speaking, and you can prove it with anthropological science, that casts a hell of a lot of doubt on the sociocultural idea. And these like cultural materialists who are saying like, no, it's access to food resources, and it's your lived experience, and it's like guns, germs, and steel, and it's all these different things. And so it created this like big fight, if that makes sense.
I think maybe part of the discomfort would be that the evolutionary is more generalizable. In other words, it could offend people from other cultures who would say, well, if they're like that by evolution, then logically, I guess we are too, but hey, that kind of puts us in an unsavory light.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the scientific community issue with it?
Well, no, because both sides were making these. It was very popular at the time, even though they had like adopted Boas's idea. All anthropologists believe this, almost forever, with the exception of people in the 20s who were into eugenics. But they got stomped out after World War II. Thank God, or I probably wouldn't be here. But like, like they were trying to make these broad, sweeping assertions because they were trying to make a name for themselves. Because every other social science, if you think about it, has always done this. History looks at all these trends to make big sweeping generalizations about people based on texts. That history repeats itself. That's why we have that. Political science definitely does that. Economics does that more than anyone else in the worst way, especially neoliberals. So I think that's the reason why. If I'm honest, there, you know.
Do you think his book became as known and famous as it did because of the controversy with those fields of thought more than the actual content itself?
Yeah.
Like somebody
And I
picked
feel
it
like a
up
lot
and
of the
read
critics
it,
had a bone to pick with him.
Yeah,
Because-
and
and
because
they
of what he was proposing.
like they spread the word, like, hey, this
Yeah.
guy's proposing this, pick it up, and
Yeah.
like,
Negative advertising.
it's,
Right.
it's,
yeah,
it's kind
exactly.
of like that
something
that
like
shit that
That's
Kanye would do. That he might still be doing with his new albums, where it's like, yeah, talk crap about me. Any press, bad or good, is good press for me because it's getting my name out there, right? Like, and there's rock stars that used to do that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Bad
They would go and
boys.
trash a hotel room right before they were dropping
Bad
a new album.
boys.
Yeah. So
So Chagnon would be canceled in today's like social media if he had posted that.
Chagnon was one of the first. Chagnon is a genius because people tried to cancel this
think
guy
cancel.
his whole life.
I would
Yeah, he
him.
fought
I
it.
don't think canceled.
Oh,
I think
boy.
he just would have been
Oh,
like
but-
heavily
But
bashed.
look how
on
reactionary
social
Trump is
media.
with tweets.
Like,
Yeah. I'm gonna make a
let's not
statement.
deal with this man
Chen-
anymore. Let's
Chagnon
cross him off of everything.
Is
That's
the
a word? Oh wow.
It's a
He's-
thing now.
he's the Fidel Castro
Like blacklist.
of the anthropology
Hey,
world.
Wow.
Because
He's the what?
Fidel
Fidel
Castro.
Castro.
I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean like
He's saying it in a
he's
complimentary
90 miles
way.
away from the biggest
And he's causing
force
a
of
whole
freedom,
bunch of-
doing this the whole time, and somehow staying alive, and like avoiding multiple attempts on his life, like books that were
Yeah.
written that allege all sorts of shit, and he just didn't die.
Yeah.
He was like a rogue outcast, and that's why he
Well,
was
that's
like,
because he was from the Midwest.
yeah, he was just resilient. Like he was just so.
Well, after spending 3 years in the Amazon, based on that first chapter, he had to be resilient.
Oh, he was a badass.
He was a badass.
Yeah.
Speaking of him being a badass,
And to bring his
I'd
own
like to
child
introduce you to
there.
the man, the myth, the legend in our next slide, Napoleon Chagnon. Look how raw he looks.
He just
Yes.
He just, not even a month ago.
PhD from
Couple
Yeah,
weeks
he
ago.
said
At
that-
81.
Wow,
Couple
At
weeks ago.
81. He lived long.
No, more October ya pasó, mira.
1 month. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so he's been to
I was
over
like, wait.
60 Yanomamo villages, lived with the Yanomamo for a total of 42 months. One of the best-selling anthropology texts. He ended up beating the other book that was in
Margaret
his
Mead.
play.
Yeah, about Simone.
Yes.
Mm.
Pioneered visual ethnography, the axe fight, shows the war between the two villages over kinship networks. We have a small preview we can show you if you guys didn't watch it already. Extremely influential in academia, anthropology, and in determining the place of advocacy and of observation in it all. So this is our author.
So I have a question for you, because everyone's like, oh, he looks like such a badass, what badass? Why is he like portrayed as a badass versus like a Yanomamo leader or Indian? Was it because
Well, he survived there and he didn't get killed, and he was one of the first people to do it.
Yeah.
that
So-
was a foreigner? Like, because he was a foreigner? That
Yeah,
because all these
And he
people
was
are
the
doing
first
it
to go
all
to a
the
lot
time.
of villages that never saw
The
foreigners.
interior.
Yes,
Yeah.
into the hearts of
And then he wrote a
African
book later. He rewrote this book and renamed it "A Noble People: How I
Yeah, it's the
Survived
latest edition.
2 Hostile Tribes."
Yes, and we'll get into the
Yanomamo
second
and
one
the
about Travis
anthropologist.
anthropologist.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
anthropologists were the second. That
Yeah.
had to
And-
make some people.
And so here's the thing about him. Like, I think I put this in our group chat. Like, he's like the real life Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
He slept with a shotgun under his bed. Like, he like tried the hell out of these people. Like, there's
Yeah.
He even
multiple stories
uses
we'll
the
go.
flashlight like a deadly weapon.
Yeah,
Who
like
who does that except James Bond or this thing?
yeah. So, regardless of how I feel about his writing, like, first I'll never fight that dude. But I'd also like, it kind of took a really badass dude to do this job. at
And he
the
was
time.
26 when he first went.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, he's super
You
skinny.
wanna know how you
Yeah.
know that he's a badass? He used to smoke a pipe. I
yeah.
saw him in the documentary, the pipe, and he'd just like sit on the little hammock with his pipe.
Is that
And
And what better person to go mimic with the
Oh, what's that?
Yanomamo?
I'll go back.
Because they prize badassery.
Yeah. So
And swaggery.
I because I know that y'all get the the itis from eating all this delicious food. Because I bought you food. Well, we bought you.
Thank
Oh
you.
God, here
He's
it goes.
gonna make
We,
us work.
we want something in return.
We have
So
to
since
work.
you all can't give us women, metal tools, or anything like that,
No drugs.
Or drugs.
or names,
So, I mean,
then we're gonna need something back from you. So we actually created a worksheet for you all,
I
and
knew
we
it.
created an activity.
I left all
um,
my pens at home.
All right, we got you, Finn.
Oh, I was gonna say, I'll give you
We
a
can
pen.
solve that.
We can find pens here. We can use these like ghetto pencils. But all right, so we made this thing. I'll hand it out after I explain it because
Okay.
that's the way I guess these things work. It's what we're actually gonna have you do for the next like 15 to 20 minutes is design an ethnographic research study.
What?
And the reason for that is you just heard me pontificate like a crazy person about the danger of being an armchair anything. So it's super easy to sit here in our comfy ass classroom and our non-dissertation, I don't think any of us have written dissertations here, but definitely non-ethnography writing context and be like, bro, that guy was racist as hell, bro. I mean, like, bro, if I was there in the Amazon, right? And so we want to take the class out of the armchair of critiquing ethnographers and their work. In this case, Chagnon. And we want to actually put ourselves in, with this brief 20-minute exercise, this harsh reality of ethnographic research and design and ethics, right? And I think, and this is just me, and I could be talking about my own thing, I don't think there's a harder form of research than this. Because any other form of research normally doesn't involve you, like, putting yourself in, a context with the people you don't know, that don't know you, having to build trust,
It
trying
reminds
to,
me of working in retail. It's truly the hardest thing there is.
yes,
I'm serious.
and you want to do it in such a way where it doesn't harm or influence
And
or
sell them.
impose. Yeah,
They're going to take money out of their pocket.
and then it's like, what makes this research even harder is that you're talking about people's identities, which is the thing that people are more sensitive about than money than anything, because you're trying to communicate them as they would want to be communicated.
yes.
And a lot of times people don't write, or like these people couldn't count past 3, or past 2, sorry.
Yeah.
So like, and you're trying to do that with like trying to be self-aware and humble enough of your own biases and all this stuff.
And
And
not
so
only that, the work you produce will also influence the thought of others. So be mindful of that as well when you are creating your ethnography.
yeah, so we wanna do it. I assigned you guys things. Thank you all for doing it. Thank you for sharing yours. We won't be using yours though, because it would have been these people.
That's true.
Yeah. So our first group is Grace and 3 others, and you guys are going to be doing an ethnography of female drug lords in Mexico. Have
That's
fun with
cool.
that one.
Who are the other big people?
Whoever is not named in my other things.
Who
Who did not post?
The second group is an ethnography of the hegemony of English-only rules and Puerto Rican students, which is Gara and Alejandra, and 1 other person. And then Robert, everyone else, and Dr. Joe is actually going to be doing an ethnography of the peasant farmers in Chiapas.
Oh.
So before we talk about controversies and his book, I want you guys to actually embed yourselves in it. Sound good?
Wait, so who's our 3? Us 3? Maybe?
You're now going to look at.
So I guess it would be
English
you
hegemony.
2 and Dr. Joe then.
Or, I don't know.
Oh, well, I kind of called
Oh,
him.
wait.
out.
However y'all want to do it, go ahead. I'm not gonna. It's your ethnography. So
Female drug lords in
Here,
Mexico.
here.
It's your.
Alright.
It's your.
So how does this my topic?
Yeah,
Yeah, just like that.
Let's do it, Dr. Joe.
What's that?
Let's do it.
So you're gonna be with Robert?
Female drug lords
Yeah.
in Mexico. Wait, we got the
Yeah,
female
come
drug
on.
Wait, we
lords.
got the female drug
We had
lords.
confusion
No,
here
I
over who.
we all, it's the same.
We are confusion.
It's the same.
Morales, I think
Oh,
you're doing
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Listed down.
It's just that it's listed one less.
I don't know.
Oh,
okay.
I'm just guessing here. He looks like he's tied up. Bring your chair with you.
Oh, you guys are trust.
Here, why don't you bring your chair over here and sit in the middle?
All right.
Female drug lords.
So
So I
we
have
have
a
to
better
make
idea. Let me
trust
sit over there on that side so I can be next to them.
Female
Okay,
And then
2
one of you
groups,
can take.
yeah.
How do I give
you
it
have to make trust
See what I'm
people who
saying?
murdered everyone. Is
Go.
that different?
Go to a party.
And
Bro, write it down. You guys are gonna present this, by the way,
Hold on, let me pause this.
in about
Venezuelan and Brazilian governments. They brought them new resources, machetes, guns, pots, whatever they need. Destruction of natural resources, their environment, because he even speaks in the later chapters how there used to be big herds of armadillos and capybaras and stuff like that, but as he started coming, he saw less and less game. Missionaries would bring in chickens, but the Yanomamo didn't really want to eat those chickens because the chickens were part of their culture. They were part of the nature because they were domesticated, so that brought in a whole different level of complexity. Research brought tourists yearning for the Yanomamo experience. Catholicism, some of them are even asking for churches at this point. I'm going to show you guys a little clip. And as you can see, they had a complex spiritual system, but all of that looks like it's going to be left behind and probably even demonized, such as other belief systems. They were also becoming to be seen as a form of revenue. Venezuelans who carried supplies to the mission brought back plantains and other fruits and veggies from the Yanomamo and upsold it up to 800% profit. Introduction of new diseases. Blood samples showed how vulnerable they were. There was a measles outbreak that broke up, and Chagnon got some of his doctor friends. They went back to the villages to inject everybody. 3,000. They had 3,000 shots. But by that time, a lot of Yanomamo already died.
I saw this little video that had members of the Yanomamo complaining that they want the blood samples back
Oh yeah, I read about that too.
because they said the blood is sacred. Well, it's sacred and it's necessary to put their dead people to
Yeah,
rest.
like you're not
That
supposed
the
to
soul
keep it
will
or
not, the
something.
person will not rest until all their blood is back. And they're like, these white people took the blood and we want it back. It's lawfully ours.
Because
We
they
can't take it.
cremate the bodies and then they put the ashes. They eat some of the ashes that day, and then a year later they have like a remembering festival for this person to like celebrate that they've definitely got to whatever level they need to get to of this fourth-tiered system.
Yes.
And so if the blood isn't burned, you know,
I was
still
so
kinda
impressed by the fact that they went out and used the Western media they adapted to the Western media and stood on their claim and said, this is our right. So they're using the system to benefit themselves. Instead of being victims, they're now becoming empowered to complain.
and
I was really impressed, but I don't know what was the final outcome, but they were like very clear. You guys crossed the line of ethics.
And here's the thing, it talks about, go back real quick, we're going to get into this, and we'll have a discussion about this, but when they took those blood samples, they weren't trying to hurt them.
No, obviously.
When they gave them the measles vaccine that like backfired, that was common in America, but hurt these people a lot, they were trying to be advocates for them. They were trying to prevent them from dying from diseases that came
But
from
from
minors.
Western
And,
perspective.
yeah, and not from their own perspective.
Yeah, but
And the rightness or wrongness of it with 50 years of hindsight is kind of ambiguous. It's like,
Their intentions were good. But
yeah,
But I just want to say I find it very interesting because after they took the blood samples, that's the same time he was going to fly back and give them the vaccines. That's the same time the measles outbreak occurred. So I'm just saying, I just find that coincidental and very interesting.
yeah,
and that
it's
is a
suspect.
controversy
It's
because
suspect.
people haven't,
But you guys already
haven't
know how
decided.
I'm very skeptical.
But at the
so.
same time, there was the
I'm with
gold
you.
rush and a
Right.
lot of ganaderos.
The miners,
How do you say
Brazilian miners,
ganaderos?
ganaderos.
Ganaderos.
They brought a lot of disease, including measles.
And
They
Brazilian
penetrated into the water systems
Brazilian.
and they threw mercury in the water by cleaning the gold, but also their own bodies. They brought measles in, and that was the 1987 gold rush, right?
So it's like, what's the role of an anthropologist? Am I a broker to this culture? Am I an advocate of this culture? Am I just an observer? We'll get into that soon.
So yeah, I have questions for you. So missionary work. They spread the word of Jesus Christ. They saved souls. They brought in these items. So I wanted to ask you guys, what were the missionaries advocating, and who were they advocating for? So
Church.
Okay, Jesus.
Did I say that?
Both of them are Mormon missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like
I'll just put a picture of me.
That's
So
the
they're
uniform.
advocating from Moroni.
Does it not Yanomamo?
Nope, that's the uniform.
And I didn't want to just put white guys as the missionaries. So like, let me mix it up. Let me not place blame.
Let me know.
That's a good one.
That was good, bro. Yeah, you know,
That's good.
That's good. I'm trying to, you know.
I really thought that was
Very
incredible.
insightful.
Incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, you guys can think about that, and if you have any answers, you can, you know, shout them out later.
Well, I was gonna say, it just reminds me of the recent case of the guy who went to where was that
Wasn't that like a year ago?
South-
Where
a year ago that
South China Sea.
yes.
Oh yeah.
A place where it was specifically said, do not step here
Oh,
because
that he
you will
died?
be shot.
Yes.
And
No.
you will not
Did he
shot,
die?
killed.
he got killed.
He got
got killed.
killed.
Bueno, he died because he went where he was supposed to.
You said good?
Yeah. He was forewarned.
That means you're an idiot.
He died because he was an idiot.
And he was a missionary.
I do
right?
remember
Like,
hearing about that. It was a big
That
controversy.
was like a year
too.
ago, almost two
and
maybe.
it's this whole idea of saving souls for Christ all over the world, even if you know it's.
And I
very-
think the reoccurring question is what Eric keeps on asking, which is like, really, what is the role of an anthropologist? And there an answer to that, because there's a limit that you shouldn't cross, right? Like,
Right.
What is the
where's
role of
it?
missionary?
It's the same, right?
To not exist anymore.
You're gonna love
Oh,
this
that's brutal.
because
You're a missionary.
we can have a conversation
Later.
in the last week when we talk about Protestant theology all the way into liberation theology, the role of Christian.
What kind of food should he serve in that one?
The blood of Jesus.
Pão de queijo,
Wine and bread.
just
Yeah.
Wine and bread.
wine and bread. But so we want to talk
Probably the
about
wine.
the effects of our boy Shaggy on anthropology, and I
Shaggy.
put it under the subheading postmodernists ruin everything, because there was always tension between him and the sociocultural people, but there was a tension in all of anthropology. Was it evolutionary forces? Was it just humans being and learning from their environments that drove culture? That's a civilized discussion.
The white people making everything.
Essentially. But you know, you have this thing in the 90s. You have this significant theoretical shift from what would be like modernist explanations of society to what is a postmodern and understanding of society. And so if you know what modernity is, just briefly so you can understand it, modernity is like 2.7 children, or 1.7 children, and like your perfect white picket house, and there's one direction that things are going, and there is such thing as truth, and we can know that, and like your biases don't affect your way that you understand science. Postmodernity is fuck that. You can't know truth. Bias ruins everything, and so therefore we need to be skeptical and critical of everything and everyone. These
And
aren't
your picket
value
fence
judgments.
is rainbow colored now.
Huh?
Your picket fence is now rainbow
Yeah,
colored.
it's rainbow color. It doesn't even exist because it separates you from people, and who are you to say who you can be separated from or not from, right? So that's the theory. But postmodernist anthropological theory basically asserts that you need to be skeptical of the science of any social science being able to produce universally valid knowledge. So they're questioning at the heart of postmodernity's core
The universal.
the universalness of your claims and what science is, because a postmodern critique of any empirical study is that empiricism is Western, and that means that you're saying that you can know ultimate truth, or you can know knowledge, your epistemology, your theory of knowledge, that word that we're supposed to know, is Western, therefore it's biased. Yes.
Wouldn't postmodernism also be Western? So it's also
Good point.
garbage.
We'll get there. People started to realize that in anthropology in the 2009s-ish.
Also recently.
An emphasis
all the way.
an emphasis on including the voices of those being studied. There's a big movement in anthropology to actually be an advocate. This is very different from everyone from me, from all these people. These people were not. This guy Chagnon did not want to be an advocate. He was an observer, right? There's a shift there, and there's a skepticism towards these grand theories to explain other cultures. It's taking this idea of cultural relativism that I said from Franz Boas and pushing it into the realm of like this ideology that kind of just really deconstructs everything more than it governs everything. And so this shift, alongside of lack of untouched classical fieldwork opportunities, basically there were no more uncontacted native people that anthropologists could go find, so they didn't have shit to do. So they had to figure out who they were going to study. And it led them to turn their analysis in on themselves. And so now they're starting to question all this ethnographic work, and Chagnon is actually at the epicenter of it all because of the language he used. right? And so this tension leads to a debate about the role of anthropologists and the nature of the people groups they studied. And I put the questions that they were asking from what I read, which is essentially, are anthropologists observers, recording culture with as little service as possible? Are ethnographic research methods oppressive? Like, am I oppressing you by trying to tell your story to other people? Is advocacy a part of my job as an anthropologist? Like, is our whole field, like, should we even exist? This is, postmodernity did this in every field, by the way, but especially
Existentialism
Especially in
crisis.
anthropology.
yeah, and it started to ask to change the nature of the data points, right? Like, are these people and cultures, are they just data points, or are they human rights cases? Are they even meant to be studied? Should we even involve ourselves? Is it ethical for anthropologists to disturb cultures, present paradigms in any way? Is that right or is that wrong? And this is really the theoretical framework for all the articles that we shared, all the tension that. Remember that book that dude wrote that just totally like took
The
a huge
dark,
shift?
whatever, the dark is Dorado or
Yeah.
something.
Well, here's the thing. The Anthropological Association of America put together an El Dorado team to investigate all this stuff. And that book is coming out of that, right? And so there's this huge tension in anthropology because you start cannibalizing each other. And really, I think postmodernism was, it's big now in our culture. I'd say it's a driving force behind all of our culture today. But in anthropology, this crisis was resolved because ethnographies were actually saved as scientific because basically they said, like, you can't take away the value of someone who's not from your culture going to your culture to learn your culture. And what they
Wait, can you repeat that? You said that very fast. You cannot
can't-
take away the value
of someone who's not from your culture, like let's say to use the
Going to
language
your
first and third
culture?
world, a first world person going into a third world paradigm and understanding it, and a third world person coming into a first world paradigm and understanding it from an academic level. You can't take away the value of that because there's this isn't from anything anthropology, it's from a book I read, but who you are is found in the face of the other person. So as I talk to Kara, she sees parts of me that I don't see, and so she's able to point those things out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's also this idea that they kind of say that every single cultural and human interaction involves someone with a distinct and nuanced person or culture interacting with another person. So if you just scale that all the way up to anthropology and ethnographic research studies,
like
the
huge.
science of it is saved, right? So this was resolved in anthropology. This isn't something we discuss anymore for the most part because if not, we wouldn't exist. But what is still discussed quite a bit, and what I think is relevant for discussion of Latin America, is our research people, or the people we're looking into, or our research topics, are they more of data points, or are they more of human rights cases? Are, like, what's our role? Are we supposed to advocate, or are we supposed to be an observer? And so, Jovan and I talked, and we thought about this image. Does anyone know this image?
I've seen
You
it
do?
before.
Yeah.
Tell us.
You want me to tell you?
Yeah, if you know.
Well, I don't remember where that was. I know it's
Yes.
and the photographer took the picture and it won like the whatever award for pictures is. Like it became very famous. I don't know. There's an award for it, right? There's one particular award for it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
won like the photography award, like
Of
the big one
of
of.
the year.
Yeah.
The Oscar of the.
Yeah,
It's our
yeah.
Oscar.
The one best picture.
Yeah. The
One
Grammys.
best picture, one best photo, but the photographer just took the picture, but didn't do anything to help the kid who was clearly starving and who has even like
He's prey.
the vulture waiting for him to die or for them to die and be eaten by it. And he didn't do anything, and then he was like racked with guilt evermore. I don't know.
I think he
I don't know.
killed
who's-
himself.
Yeah,
Oh wow.
So
That's
the question is
That's a
like,
lot of guilt.
as we research, so like Latin America, right? It's
putting me on the spot, man.
no, you did a good job. It's it's born in blood and fire. It's defined by colonialism and neoliberalism, neo-imperialism. It's defined by all these things. You're talking about a people group that are in some way marginalized, or a region that's been marginalized. Yeah, that's been peripherized. All these things. It's been like it's politically and economically what we've read the last couple of months kind of been like the lab rat of the world.
Yeah.
And so like my question for you all is what's our job? As researchers, are we advocates or observers, and what balance do we have?
What's
That's
your
legitimately. I'm not gonna tell my answer.
And like, should Chagnon have brought measles vaccinations with him? I guess that
Yeah.
would be a question.
Yeah, like what's his role? What's our role? Like, what's our place in it?
I mean, I would think that I don't know as much of getting involved, but definitely instruyendo ourselves, like learning and just like trying. I think that you realize you don't really like you can never know it all, right? So constantly trying to be learning and understanding. I don't know exactly what or how to do with that knowledge once we have it, but I think that's definitely a part of it. I think that's something that Chagnon failed at, that he kind of had this attitude of like, oh no, I've lived there, I've been there, like I know it all, like you
There's,
know.
I think there's two sides. It's kind of coin of the people who believe that you should leave these people. You should observe from the outside and just
Let them be.
document your data and let them be and let them live their lives because this is how they've lived for centuries. And then there are the ones that say we should go in here and not kind of like throw them off